offer that safe, impartial space to talk. Living and working through a pandemic, I think, made many people reflect on their lives and what they want from work, what they want from their relationships. What is it that really makes us happy? We've been here since 1997. We have listened to tens of thousands of people in law talk about their struggles. So there's probably very little that we haven't heard before. So if you say I'm a trainee solicitor in a city law firm and I've just moved into my second seat and I'm not sure I want to do this anymore, we know what that means.
On today's Legally Speaking podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Elizabeth Rimmer. Elizabeth is the CEO of Lawcare, a mental health charity. Lawcare supports and promotes mental well-being in the legal community. Elizabeth studied law at the College of Law and has an MA in medical law and ethics from King's College London. She also has a BSc in zoology. Elizabeth qualified as a clinical negligence solicitor at Lee Day. She was then Executive Director for the Alzheimer's Disease International and the Institute of Group Analysis before joining Lawcare. So, a very big warm welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Rob. It's really great to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Before we dive into all the amazing work you are doing, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality of the law, if you've seen it?
I have not watched it, I'm afraid, so I can't answer your question.
And that we're going to give it a 0 and move
I'll give it a 0.
on.
I think that's all I can do, to be fair. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Justified 0. And let's
Okay.
get on to talking all about you. Would you mind telling our listeners a bit about your background and career journey?
Yeah, so I started my working life as a solicitor. Although I have a slight accent, people always ask me about that. I am British. I was born in London. I was born in Woolwich, southeast London. But I grew up living overseas and going to school wherever we lived because of my dad's job. So I came back to the UK when I was 15, partway through my O-levels. That dates me, which was now GCSEs. But I am British, and I'm a Londoner, really. Although I don't really sound it. So I started my working life as a solicitor, and then I was in the law for a few years, and then I moved on into working in the charity sector.
Yeah, and you've been doing some incredible work for many years now. But I want to cast your mind back to the world of zoology, which I found quite interesting because you studied law and an MA in medical law and ethics and a BSc in zoology. So where did that interest in zoology stem from?
Yeah, so a good question. I often wonder how I landed up with zoology. Well, I know how I landed up with a zoology degree. I did science A-levels, biology, chemistry, and maths, and biology was my favorite A-level. And not really knowing what I wanted to do, I started a general biology degree. And I then really liked the professor who was the head of the zoology department. And so I switched courses in my second year just so I could have tutorials. He was a very eminent immunologist. Coincidentally, his daughter landed up marrying a very good friend of mine, but that's another story. And so although I have a degree in zoology, I didn't actually do much by the way of animal studies. I really did genetics and biochemistry, but because I got the degree in the Department of Zoology, I'm classified as having a zoology degree. But if you asked me anything to do with the sorts of animals you might see in a zoo, I really couldn't help you with that. So it's a bit of a misnomer, I think. So it's purely because I was in that department, I've got a zoology degree.
There we have it. Well, if you were to ask me which animals you'd see in the zoo with a young toddler, I'm pretty well informed, actually. I spend quite a lot of weekends down at Blackpool Zoo, going around. But I appreciate you sharing that, because we all have our own stories and journeys, and that was obviously pre-clinical negligence. So you then went on to qualify as a clinical negligence solicitor. So what cases did you deal with there, and what aspects of the work did you most enjoy about that?
After my degree, I almost actually went down the path of being an academic. I had a place to do a PhD in molecular biology. Sounds very intellectual. But I changed my mind and I ducked out of that. And I thought I've always had an interest in law. So that's how I landed up going down the law path. And then my clinical negligence work, I worked at Lee Day, so I was very lucky to be there because at that time Sarah Lee was one of the pioneering clinical negligence solicitors in the country, and I was her trainee, and I got kept on in her department. So I was beside myself that I had found myself in this kind of top law firm for doing that kind of work. Yeah, the work we did was really varied. So I did some work on the breast implant cases about women who'd had silicone breast implants and the damage that had caused to them as a result of those going wrong. I did quite a lot of child birth injury cases, and I did a number of cases of people who had died during surgical procedures. Alongside that, we were also encouraged to do inquest work. So I acted on a number of inquests for people who died in custody or in prison, and all quite difficult stuff. And really interesting piece of work that I got to do when I was there was I assisted a partner who, in fact, she became the managing partner of the firm later on the child migrant cases. So these were back in the 1930s and 40s. The UK literally exported children who were orphaned or had been born. And back in the day when people were very judgmental about women who had children that weren't married, they were often taken away from them. And some of these children were sent to Australia as child migrants, where you've probably read about horrendous abuse and difficult things happened to them. So our firm were doing some work with the Child Migrant Trust, and I got to spend a summer as a trainee down at the Public Record Office in Kew, looking at all the shipping records and what was said in Parliament about sending these very young children away. So we did a whole wide range of things. But I think at the time I wasn't aware of Lawcare or the mental health challenges that some of the impact the work can have on you. And that was part of the reason that I decided to take a year off and do the Masters in Medical Law and Ethics, because I remember thinking at the time, this work could probably kill me in terms of how hard it was. Emotionally listening to people who'd had really terrible things happen, and they would come in to see you, and basically what people really wanted was an answer. They wanted to know what had gone wrong, and they really wanted an apology. And I think I found the system quite frustrating because it isn't really designed to deliver that. At a base level, what we were doing was there to financially compensate people for loss. And you can never compensate people for some of the things that had happened to them, the loss of a child, or somebody who's left unable to work, or somebody who's died in custody, really tough stuff. And so I think that's where a kind of seed of awareness around some of the challenges that people face in those areas of law was kind of planted with me. But I certainly really enjoyed the variety, the intellectual challenge of having to learn about new situations and medical procedures. And the firm did a lot of high profile cases as well. So it was very exciting being in an environment like that where there was a lot going on in the firm to basically challenge injustice in all types of forms. So it was I enjoyed that aspect of the work a lot.
Yeah, and it sounds like an incredibly varied and important role that you had, and I guess leading to another important role that you had, obviously executive director for the Alzheimer's Disease International and the Institute of Group Analysis. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about your role there and what that involved?
So for Alzheimer's Disease International, that was an accidental career choice. So while I was doing what I'd been at Lee Day, I think I was qualified about 3 years when I decided to do this MA in medical law and ethics, thinking like a lawyer, oh, that'll look good on my CV if I want to go back into law, because I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to stay in law. So while I was doing that, I got a job working for Alzheimer's Disease International as the administrator, because my MA was I only had to be in college 2 days a week, and the rest of the time I was at home. And by then I had a mortgage, so I needed income And so I was just working, this is how long ago it was, sending faxes all day long. The chap that ran the organization, he became quite unwell and he didn't come back. And so when I was finishing up my MA, they said, "Oh, would you like to come and work? Would you like to stay and take on his job?" And I'd kind of, by this point, thought I was going to go back to law. And then I thought, oh, the path not taken. It was an international job. I did a lot of traveling and I'd grown up that way. So there was a lot of appeal for that. And I was very interested in the cause of dementia, which at that time in the 90s perhaps didn't have the attention that it has now. So that's how I landed up there. And I stayed there for 10 years. And that's a global federation of Alzheimer's societies in different countries. And our role was to really help build the capacity of those organizations to support people with dementia. And a bit like what we do at Lawcare, we commissioned a lot of research around the global impact of dementia. So I loved that job. It was a lot of fun. We were in like 85 countries, so I was always getting to go to very obscure places like Uruguay, and all over the place. So it was great. And then I moved on. I left that job when I had my son. Well, I went back when he was born, and I got on a plane because I had to go to South Korea for a meeting, and I was walking all the way to the back of the plane, sitting in something like 55G, and I burst into tears, and I thought, oh, I've left my 6-month-old baby with my mother. I can't do this job. I can't travel and leave my son at home. So I came back from that trip and I resigned, having thought I would manage it all. And then I had a bit of time out and then decided to go back to work. And that's how I landed up at the Institute of Group Analysis, mainly because it was walking distance from my front door. So I could drop my son at nursery, walk to work, and then pick him up. But I was also interested in that I knew nothing about psychoanalysis, and this is an organization that trains group psychoanalysts, so people that look at group dynamics and how people interact in a group. So I was there for 4 years, and then we had moved by then. We'd left London. We moved to Bath. I was finding it a bit of a struggle having to go up to London. This is kind of before there was a lot of flexible working. I would go 1 or 2 days a week. And then I saw the job advertised at Lawcare, and I thought, oh, I'm thinking I want to leave this job. I'm looking for something else. Lawcare was fully remote. My son was 5, 6 at the time. So I thought, maybe a bit older, I thought, a job that's remote, home-based. I have a young son in primary school. I'll have the flexibility that I need. So, and also I was really interested with my legal background. They were looking for someone who was a lawyer to come and be the new CEO. And I thought, oh, this has got to be a job for me. All right. So that's how I landed up at Lawcare. None of my career has been by design, really. It's all been what's presented to me at that point in my life. And I thought, this looks like the best option for me. I'll go that way.
And we like that. We like the authentic journeys, the stories, and you've talked about it there. But I would love to sort of dive in more to Lawcare, because you are the now CEO. So for those that may not be familiar, would you mind telling us a bit more about the mental health charity?
Yeah. So Lawcare is the mental health charity for the legal sector across the UK. We operate in all 3 jurisdictions, Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. And we support everyone. About 350,000 people work in legal services across the UK. And I think an important point to make is about 40% of people in legal services are not legally qualified. They're working in other roles in HR, IT, business services. So we support everybody in the sector, all different types of lawyers, from Silex lawyers, trademark attorneys, patent attorneys, the judiciary, solicitors, barristers, also people that are on the pathway into law. So if you are doing the SQE or the bar course or an apprenticeship, or you're doing a Silex program, we also support you as well. And our main function, we have 2 main roles. One is about providing support to people who are struggling with their mental health or the pressures of working or studying in law. And the other part of our work is around education and advocacy about wanting to improve working practices and culture in law to better support people in our sector.
Yeah, and look, we absolutely support the great work that you are doing and the team with Lawcare. I guess for those who may be unfamiliar, would you mind going a little bit deeper in terms of maybe if you're a lawyer in the law firm, some of the sort of the types of practical support that Lawcare could offer?
Yeah. So our support service is a telephone helpline, a web chat service, and an confidential email service. Those services operate Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. If you go on our website, you can find out how to access them. I think the unique thing about what we do is that we get it. We only operate in the legal sector. We've been here since 1997. We have listened to tens of thousands of people in law talk about their struggles. So there's probably very little that we haven't heard before, because I think many people in law feel that they look around and everybody else is gliding like the swan across the pond, but actually they're not only pedaling like this, they often might feel there's piranhas trying to bite at their feet as well, or they feel it's really hard to speak up and ask for help for that fear of the stigma that this might be a career limiting step. You might be perceived as weak or not good enough. So we offer that safe, confidential, impartial space to talk. We're not going to tell your firm. We're not going to tell the SRA. You don't have to give us your name. The only time we would breach your confidentiality would be if we were worried that you were at risk of harm to yourself or someone else. So we offer that really safe place to talk. And what many people say is just having the opportunity to get something off their chest and share how they're feeling makes them feel so much better. And although a lot of what people come to us about is related to work, there's never one thing. There's always a story, and there's other things going on in people's lives. And I think the key thing is that everyone who answers the phone or replies to an email or a web chat is somebody that's working in the law or has worked in the law. So we get it. So if you say, I'm a trainee solicitor in a city law firm and I've just moved into my second seat and I'm not sure I want to do this anymore, we know what that means. If you say, I'm a partner in a law firm, I'm in dispute with some of my other partners about X, Y, and Z, I'm really feeling pressurized, I think they want to get rid of me, we know what that feels like. So I think that's where people get the benefit of speaking to us, is that we have that understanding and knowledge about what it takes to train, qualify, and work in the legal sector.
Yeah, and it's very reassuring, for those that are going through that journey. I guess I want to talk about the evolution of, we live in a very fast-paced world. Lawcare has been supporting legal professionals for over 25 years. How has the support evolved over the years, particularly with sort of, the changes we're seeing in the workplace too?
To begin with, we had our roots in alcohol. So when we were set up in 1997, we grew out of a concern around how much lawyers were drinking and using alcohol as an unhealthy coping mechanism for the pressures of legal work. And I think perhaps then it wasn't articulated in that way. I think people could see what the problem was, but perhaps weren't linking it in the way we might now. And we only supported solicitors in England and Wales. So we've evolved now, as I mentioned at the beginning, to cover the whole legal landscape and everybody in it. I think we've also introduced new channels. We only used to be a telephone helpline. And when I first came to Lawcare, I used to have a little kind of box down on the floor, which was the manual way of changing the helpline over to the next person that was taking it on and all that kind of stuff. We now have a cloud-based call handling system, which makes life much easier. We've also introduced those new channels like web chat and email. But I think the other big thing, and alongside our support, we provide a lot of resources and education as well. But I think the big shift that's perhaps come in the last 5 or 6 years is our growing focus around the advocacy piece, about how we can encourage legal workplaces to be putting in steps and measures that are going to support people's mental health and not undermine it. And I think that's sort of the evolution that we've been in. And I think we've also massively expanded our digital presence with our webinars, our podcasts, our LinkedIn newsletter, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's been a big change as well. We're using more, I guess like everyone, we've got a wider range of channels and tools now for communicating with people in a way that we didn't have even 10 years ago.
Today's episode is brought to you by Clio. Are you frustrated with your current legal management software? You're not alone, and thousands of solicitors across the UK feel your pain. However, the hassle of moving all their existing client and case data holds most back from switching, prolonging the frustration. Clio is here to help. Their dedicated migrations team will be with you every step of the way while you transfer your information. And if you have any questions, you'll get award-winning support available 24/5 by live chat, phone, and email. So help is always there when you need it most. It's no wonder Clio consistently receives 5-star ratings for its ease of use and top-notch service. If you're ready to leave the frustration behind, visit clio.com/UK to learn more and see why Clio continues to be the go-to choice for solicitors across the UK. Now back to the show. I think the more you can reach people, have impact, help people using these multi-channel approaches, the better. You talked about obviously alcohol when starting out. What have been some of the common queries, maybe in more modern times you've been getting from Lawcare, and how do you typically respond to them?
Yeah, so I would say number one is always stress would be the most common reason people get in touch with us. And there might be a multitude of reasons as to why people are feeling stressed. Overwhelm at work, too much to do, not enough time. It could also be related to difficult relationships in the workplace. They're in conflict with other people. It could be things that are going on in their personal life, but all of that mounts up to that sense of not feeling able to manage. What's been interesting, so stress, anxiety, and depression always used to be the top three. Since COVID, we've seen a shift in that. And so what we now see is stress is number one. We see what's called career concerns, which used to come much way down the list, like 8 or 9, is now the second most common reason people reach out to us. And career concerns is people saying, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. Of all stages of their career. So we get a lot of juniors calling us, but we're getting more senior people calling us. So we think that that's perhaps our armchair informal analysis of that is perhaps the pandemic, living and working through a pandemic, I think made many people reflect on their lives and what they want from work, what they want from their relationships. What is it that really makes us happy? And I think we're now in this post-pandemic world where people have had the opportunity to have greater flexibility with their working styles, and there may be some reining back on that in some organizations. But I think more fundamentally, I think people have been thinking a lot more about their purpose and their values and wanting to align their work with that. So we are seeing an increase in those calls saying, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. It may also be, I think, reflected to the current climate of where I think a lot of people feel they're squeezed to do more with less. So there's less resource out there. So the expectation of what they can do and deliver has gone up. And so that's interesting. And then anxiety would come in third, and then bullying and harassment. And then how we respond. So when someone would call us, typically we listen. We ask questions that are kind of open questions, trying to get people to tell us a little bit more about what they're experiencing. And then we try to help people work out what steps they may need to take themselves. So would it help them if it's a work-related issue, they feel they've got too much on their plate? Could they speak to their managers or colleagues to have some of that work taken off their shoulders? Do they need to have a conversation with their manager about other things? We try and guide people to try to work things out for themselves. We don't tell people what to do. We try to help people work through and find a solution that works for them. But I think our main function is listening, and then we will signpost and direct to other resources as well, either on our website or externally, that we think will help people.
Yeah, and let's stick on help then, because supporting mental well-being doesn't needs to also be done within the firms, because Lawcare encourages healthy legal workspaces and supporting mental well-being, and we absolutely do. But what can law firms proactively be doing to support their employees and staff? Maybe a couple of practical, tactical things.
There's a lot, and I think you've hit the nail on the head when you use the word proactively. So yeah. I think I'd like to call it legacy thinking, but I'm not sure it's legacy thinking yet. But the approach to mental health has generally been reactive. Someone's struggling, they have a concern, the firm might be able to direct them to some counseling via the EAP or support them to get some external help. But that's dealing with a problem when it's arisen. By that time, it's too late, if you see what I mean. So what we are keen on that proactive. So I think number one is, I think what firms can be doing is actually trying to identify what the problems might be within their organization. Where are the pressure points? What are the risks to their mental health in the workplace? We already know quite a lot about what those risks are. Things like working long hours, a lack of supervision, low autonomy, low psychological safety. So I think from a very practical point of view, looking at what some of those risks may be and how you can mitigate them is really important. But I think alongside that is, for firms that are on the beginning of this journey, I think it's about creating that environment where open conversations are had, where people feel psychologically safe to speak up about what's concerning them, because the stigma silences people from coming forward. And if you work in an environment where you think no one's interested or they're not going to listen, or if I do raise something, nothing's going to get done about it, that just compounds it and stops people coming forward. But I think my main message to anyone listening to this is to think about what you can do around prevention. What is it about those working practices that you could be doing to improve to better support people's mental health?
Yeah, no, and everything, gets better when you start having, conversations of real meaning and coming from support. You talked about stigmas. I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper because, do you think there still is a really strong stigma surrounding mental health within the legal profession? And how can we look to sort of break down these barriers to ensure more open and just generally authentic, honest conversations?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way. Particularly since the pandemic. But I think stigma is still, we should not think we've conquered that. Because we hear all the time when people contact Lawcare, they have not spoken to anybody else about what's worrying them. And I think it's for those reasons I mentioned earlier that it's really hard to put your hand up in our sector when there is that perception that, we're perfect, we're self-sufficient, other people come to us to solve their problems, so we can't have any of our own. It'll be a career limiting step. You'll be thought of as not good enough. All of that stuff stops people from speaking up. So I think we can have more people openly speaking up about their stories and telling their stories, particularly people in senior roles. And I think we've seen a lot more of that. But I think in a law firm, you don't have to go public and put your story on a Lawcare website or the Law Society Gazette. You could be running events internally where you have a panel discussion about mental health within your firm and you get people within your firm to tell their stories. And I've been to a number of those in firms where I've been asked to be one of the speakers. They're closed events for the firm. And you can hear a pin drop when you hear a partner tell their own story about mental health. Everyone in the room is riveted to hear that because they've often never heard somebody speak like that or show some vulnerability. So I think that's the really the crucial way to challenge stigma is to get more people talking up about the issues and making it okay to speak up. It's such a hierarchical profession as law. We take our cues from how our leaders behave. So if we don't see anyone in a senior role talking about mental health or their own struggles, and that kind of is going to make other people think, maybe this isn't an environment where I can talk about what's going on for me. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, and thank you for giving really interesting insights and some practical things for us to be thinking about. I want to talk about the decline of mental health, i.e., what are often some of the first signs that your mental health needs looking at, and what are some of those in the legal profession from your experience indicating them things that might be able to help them from your experience with Lawcare?
I think one of the things is we're often better at seeing the signs in other people than we are in ourselves. So being a bit more irritable, lethargic, problems with sleep, panic attacks and nausea. You know, our brains and our physical bodies are connected. And I think if we all had to describe how we feel when we feel nervous, people will say they feel sick. You know, we feel it in ourselves. So that says poor concentration, uh, inability sometimes to switch off, feeling overwhelmed. And I think when it comes specifically into thinking about legal work, is perhaps sitting at your desk and just not getting through the task. So you're maybe not as organized. There's performance concerns about your work. You might be withdrawing from relationships at work as well, being a bit more isolated, distracted, tension in your relationships at work, but also at home. I think all of those things are signs that you might be struggling with your mental health. And, you know, it's tuning into those, which is important, is to think, well, hang on a minute, how am I actually feeling and thinking, oh, you know, that's not quite right. I should maybe think about talking to somebody or looking up what might be going on for me.
Yeah, no, again, thank you for just really letting us, into the world and the work that you're doing at Lawcare, and having this conversation, because it's only going to help so many people. And collective responsibility, I guess, is also is equally important, because you're a big believer that mental health and well-being is collective responsibility across the legal profession. Again, we support that. Why do you believe mental health is a collective responsibility from your perspective?
Because I think that as a sector, we need to join up the work that's going on around mental health and improving culture, because people, we need to start with legal education. We need to look at practice. We need to look at regulation. We need to look at professional bodies. And I think we need everybody kind of singing off the same hymn sheet if we really want to affect change. And I think there's a lot of great initiatives in the sector around mental health, but it's all quite fragmented. It's in different places, different people doing different things. And I think I think the collective responsibility is that this isn't one person's problem. It isn't just me as a solicitor who might be struggling with my mental health. It's me, it's my workplace, it's my regulator. And I think if we really want to shift the dial on improving things, we have to have a collective approach to this. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to, I think we're looking at a decade to affect real change. And that's one of the things in our study that we did in 2021, Life in the Law. That's where we called for a collective responsibility. We actually asked people in that study who they thought was responsible, and it came back as being a range of people. And I think that's a really important message, that all the stakeholders in the legal sector all have their part to play. And it isn't, if we really want to drive meaningful, lasting change, we've got to make that happen. And we have to look at all aspects of the kind of legal life course. And increasingly at Lawcare, we are working on a new strategy which will come out next year. We're repeating our Life in the Law study, which will come out in January, when this podcast comes out. And one of the things I know that we're going to be focusing on is more work around legal education, and what can we be doing in legal education to better equip people for coming into the sector, for the realities of life and practice.
I think there's a lot there, isn't there? And again, thank you for, we all have this collective responsibility, and I think it's great that you talk to that. And I always say we is greater than me. And again, if we work on that basis, the more we can all come together to support, the better. And wanting to sort of think about the next generation now of aspiring lawyers, what are your top 3 tips for those who are students wanting to take care of their mental health, and how can they look after their mental health whilst balancing the responsibilities of studying?
I think so important to support and engage with that next generation of lawyers coming into the sector. So I think 3 main things. Number one, I think it's about setting boundaries and really being careful around your boundaries. I think so that you're better able to prioritize your work-life balance, because that is a big challenge in law and practice, that maintaining boundaries can be really hard. because of the workload, it slips into working late or working at weekends. So I think if you can adopt early in your legal career while you're studying, having those boundaries in place between your study and training time and your your personal time, I think that's really important. Then I think it's also a big part of it is about find your community or find your friends. So, the fantastic thing we have in our sector, there are so many networks for younger lawyers, regionally, nationally. There's all kinds of networks that people can get involved with. The Junior Solicitors Network and the equivalents in the other jurisdictions. There's groups like Legal Cheek who do lots of events and support for juniors. So I think really getting involved in other networks and reaching out your local law society at college where you might be studying, because I think it's in those networks you find your peers and you feel better supported. You're not on your own. You're part of something bigger, and you can turn to those people in that community for that support. And I think as you go through your career, I think that's really important. I certainly remember when I was a trainee, I was an article clerk again. I'm so old. But, it was the other article clerks who were my kind of support network. And I think people gravitate towards each other. And I think find your friends in your community. And then I think really importantly, and it kind of links to my first point around boundaries, is you have to prioritize self-care. And I think we don't always see as students or aspiring lawyers or in practice that actually our minds are our greatest asset. This is where the work happens. This is where the study happens. And if we don't look after our minds, we're not going to be able to do our best work or pass that exam. And actually, the activities that support our minds are all the things that we tend to sacrifice when we feel busy. So we've got that deadline to get the essay in. Oh, okay, I won't go to the pub and meet up with my friends, or I won't go to football, or, I will not go to my book club or whatever it is. I'll sacrifice the time I was going to spend doing something that would support my mental health. Or you cut back on, you don't eat as well. You haven't got time to cook, so you order in the Domino's after a long day. So it's about recognizing that although it's not rocket science, you don't need a lot of wearable technology to look after your mental health, which I think is another era that we live in. You just need to actually value that activity that you might see as of lower value actually has huge value. Being with friends, pursuing hobbies, eating well, sleeping well. These are the things that are going to help you look after your mind and stay in that sweet spot of thriving. So I think really prioritizing and not sacrificing the time you spend on doing those sorts of activities is really important. And trying to carry that through your working life is really important.
Completely agree, and love that you again have shared so many practical and tactical tips and advice throughout this podcast. Really enjoyed it. I guess one final question before we look to close is advice you would give to lawyers or those in the legal profession who want to focus on their well-being and mental health.
So I think number one, just get started. If you want to focus on your mental health and well-being, there's not only Lawcare for resources, it's everywhere. And I think a really important point in law, and I think a lot of people sometimes struggle with this, is always hang on to why you wanted to do this in the first place. What was it that motivated you to think I want to be a lawyer? And allow that to guide your career choice. I think we get a lot of contacts from people at Lawcare, people that they always wanted to be a family lawyer, but they've landed up in conveyancing or in the corporate world, is try and follow the path that you feel is the right path for you, not the path that other people might want you to choose. But yeah, I think that's really important if you want a happy career in the law, is to make sure you are working in a practice area and an environment that suits you. But also just get started. Don't delay. Is start doing those things straight away that will make a difference.
Yeah, I remember a mentor said to me, Rob, not one day, day one. So now, day one. And I think that speaks very, very clearly to that. Elizabeth, this has been fantastic. If our listeners want to follow you or learn more about your career or indeed the work you're doing at Lawcare, where can they find out more? Feel free to shout out any websites, any social media handles. We'll also include them in this special episode for you too.
Yeah, so our website is lawcare.org.uk. So that is really the gateway to everything that we do. We have a big presence on LinkedIn. So we have a LinkedIn Lawcare page, which you can follow. You can sign up for a Lawcare newsletter and our LinkedIn newsletter, where we list all of our events that are coming up. We run a series of webinars, probably 6 to 8 free webinars a year, open to anybody in the sector. But I'd say the starting point is our website. That will tell you about our support and all the other activity that we do. And please do follow us on LinkedIn and social media and spread the word. If you're working with colleagues who haven't heard about Lawcare, let them know that we're here.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's our intention with today as well, to help spread the word. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure hosting you today. But from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, sponsored by Clio, wishing you lots of continued success with your career and indeed the future pursuits and everything you're getting up to with Lawcare. But for now, over and out.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.
Hey listeners, we're super excited to share a brand new way for you to connect with the Legally Speaking podcast. Introducing Fan Mail. Got questions about a recent episode, thoughts on legal careers, or just want to share some super positive feedback with us? Simply click the send us a text link in the show notes and your message will come straight to us. We can't wait to hear from our amazing legal community. Thank you so much for all your support from all of us here at the team. We really appreciate it.